Captain Li Dongwu pressed his palm against the cold metal railing of the bridge, his knuckles white as he stared at the holographic display. The images coming through from Kepler Colony made his blood run cold. Children were screaming as they ran through burning streets. Mothers clutched their babies while strange purple vines erupted from the ground, choking the life out of everything they touched. "Sir, incoming transmission from New Terra Colony," called out Ensign Park Menesio from the communications station. Her young face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she worked the controls. The main screen flickered to life, showing a man in torn colonial administrator clothes. Behind him, smoke rose from what used to be a thriving agricultural center. "This is Governor Kim Woo-jin of New Terra. We are under attack by unknown biological agents. Our crops are dying, our water is turning black, and people are getting sick just from breathing the air. We need immediate evacuation for 30,000 civilians." Li Dongwu felt his heart sink. New Terra was supposed to be one of their safest colonies, far from any known hostile territory. If the Vorthok had reached there, nowhere was safe. Captain Lieutenant Kim Nari's voice cut through his thoughts. She was standing at the sensor station, her face grim. "I'm detecting massive energy signatures in the Centauri system. It looks like ... It looks like they hit the farming stations there, too." The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's engines. Li Dongwu closed his eyes for a moment, remembering his daughter's school project about the Centauri farms. She had been so excited about the new vegetables they were growing there. Special hybrids that could feed millions of people back on Earth. "How many casualties?" he asked quietly. "Early reports suggest thousands, sir. Maybe tens of thousands. The bioweapons aren't just killing people outright. They're making the planets uninhabitable. The soil itself is becoming toxic." Commander Choi Minho stepped away from his tactical console, his face dark with anger. "Captain, I've been monitoring Vorthok communications. They're not even trying to hide their involvement. They're broadcasting their success across their empire. It's calling it the first lesson for the inferior humans." Li Dongwu felt something cold settle in his stomach. In all his years of service, he had never encountered such calculated cruelty. The Vorthok weren't just attacking military targets or even trying to conquer human territory. They were poisoning entire worlds, making sure that even if humanity survived, they would have nothing left to return to. Sir Kim Nari's voice was strained. "We're getting reports from 5 more colonies. Eden Prime, Haven, New Seoul, Prosperity, and New Busan, they're all under attack." The mention of New Busan hit Li Dongwu like a physical blow. His brother lived there with his family. His nephew, barely 10 years old, had just started at the colony school. "Get me Admiral Park Ji-ho at Earth Command," he ordered, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. "Priority Alpha channels." Holographic display shimmered, and Admiral Park Ji-ho's weathered face appeared. Even across the vast distance of space, Li Dongwu could see the fury in the older man's eyes. "Captain Li, I assume you've seen the reports?" "Yes, sir." 7 colonies confirmed, possibly more. The Vorthok are using some kind of biological warfare agent that corrupts entire ecosystems. "This isn't a military campaign, Admiral. This is genocide." Park Ji-ho nodded grimly. "The Galactic Council has been contacted. They're calling for restraint and diplomatic solutions. The Altarian ambassador actually suggested we should negotiate with the Vorthok about territorial boundaries." "Territorial boundaries, Commander?" Choi Minho burst out. "Sir, they're poisoning our children." "I know, Commander. But the Council sees this as just another border dispute between younger species. They don't understand that this is different." Lieutenant Kim Nari looked up from her station. "I'm intercepting more Vorthok transmissions. They're laughing about it. They're calling humans soft and weak. They say we've been playing at being civilized for so long that we've forgotten how to really fight." Li Dongwu felt something shift inside him. For 2 centuries, humanity had followed the Terran Accords, agreements they had made with themselves after their own dark history of warfare. They had promised to be better, to solve conflicts through diplomacy, to use their technology for peace rather than war. But the Vorthok had made a critical mistake. They thought humanity's restraint was weakness. They thought that because humans chose to be civilized, they had forgotten how to be savage. Admiral Lee Dongwu said quietly, "What are our orders?" Park Ji-ho was silent for a long moment. The background, Lee Dongwu could hear the controlled chaos of Earth Command's war room. Officers shouting coordinates and casualty reports. "The Emergency War Council is convening in 1 hour," Park Ji-ho finally said. "Captain, I need you to understand something. For 200 years, we've kept certain technologies locked away, certain capabilities that we swore we would never use again. The Vorthok have just given us a reason to remember why we locked them away in the first place, sir." "Get me a direct line to Earth Command," Lee Dongwu said, his voice carrying a tone that made everyone on the bridge straighten up. It's time they learned what humans are really capable of when you threaten our families. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Outside the viewports, stars twinkled peacefully. Unaware that the galaxy was about to change forever, the elevator descended deeper into the Terran military, complex than most people knew existed. Admiral Park Ji-ho watched the floor numbers tick. By level 50, level 75, level 100. Finally, at level 150. The doors opened with a soft hiss. The Emergency War Council chamber was a massive circular room, carved directly into the bedrock beneath Geneva. Holographic displays lined the walls, showing real-time updates from the attacked colonies. The air hummed with tension as humanity's top military leaders filed in, their faces grim. General Yoon Taemin was the first to speak as he took his seat. "Admiral, the latest reports are worse than we thought. The Vorthok bioweapons aren't just killing our crops. They're changing the fundamental structure of our soil. Even if we drive them back, those worlds might be uninhabitable for decades." "How many confirmed dead?" asked Colonel Han Soyoung, her fingers dancing over her tablet as she pulled up intelligence reports. 43,000 civilians and counting," replied General Kim Jae-haen from the Defense Ministry, "but that's just the direct casualties. The refugees fleeing the poisoned zones are overwhelming our medical facilities. We're looking at a humanitarian crisis that could affect millions." Park Ji-ho activated the central hologram, showing a three-dimensional map of human space. Red zones marked the attacked colonies, spreading like a disease across their territory. "The Vorthok aren't trying to conquer us. They're trying to exterminate us. Every world they touch becomes a dead zone." Commander Lee Soo-jin, head of Naval Intelligence, leaned forward. "Sir, we've intercepted their communications. They're calling this Phase 1 of what they're calling the human cleansing. They plan to systematically poison every human world until we're forced to evacuate back to Earth." "And then what?" asked General Yoon Taemin. "Then they poison Earth too." The room fell silent. Through the massive windows, they could see the lights of Geneva far above, twinkling like stars. Somewhere up there, children were going to school. People were falling in love. Families were having dinner. None of them knew that their entire species was being marked for extinction. The Galactic Council's response? Park Ji-ho asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Colonel Han Soyoung pulled up another display. "The Altarians are calling for measured diplomatic engagement. The Centaurians want to form a fact-finding committee. The Andromedans are suggesting we should examine what provocations led to this unfortunate misunderstanding." Misunderstanding? General Kim Jae-haen's voice was barely controlled. "They poisoned New Busan yesterday. My daughter was visiting her grandmother there. They're both in a medical facility right now, fighting for their lives because they breathe air that the Vorthok turned into poison." Park Ji-ho stood up, his shadow falling across the holographic display. "For 200 years, we've followed the Terran Accords. We've limited our military technology, restricted our weapons development, and promised ourselves that we would never again become the monsters we once were. We did this because we learned from our own history, remembered what humans were, capable of in our darkest moments." He paused, looking at each face around the table. "These were good people, men and women who had dedicated their lives to protecting humanity through peaceful means. But peace only worked when both sides wanted it. The Vorthok think our restraint is weakness. They think that because we chose to be civilized, we've forgotten how to be savage. They're about to learn how wrong they are." General Yoon Taemin shifted uncomfortably. "Admiral, The Erebus protocols were sealed for good reason. The technologies we developed during the Unification Wars, some of them were deemed too dangerous for any species to possess. Psychological weapons alone could break the Vorthok military without firing a single shot, interrupted Colonel Han So-young. I've been reviewing the files, fear frequency generators, the nightmare broadcasters, the doubt seed implants. You could make their soldiers afraid to sleep, afraid to eat, afraid to trust their own equipment, and the quantum disruptors, asked Commander Li Suzhen quietly. The ones that can make entire fleets simply disappear? Park Ji-ho nodded grimly. All of it. Every weapon we swore we'd never use again. Every piece of technology that made us question our own humanity. The Vorthok have given us a reason to remember why we were afraid of ourselves. Vote was called. One by one, the hands went up, unanimous. For the first time in 2 centuries, humanity was about to unleash its full potential for war. Within minutes, coded messages were being sent to secret facilities across human space. Deep underground on Luna, massive vault doors that hadn't been opened in generations began to cycle through their unlock sequences. On Mars, automated systems that had been dormant for decades hummed to life. Captain Shin Haijin received her orders while commanding a routine patrol near the Vega system. The message was short. Report to Facility 7. Erebus authorization granted. Prepare for Operation Pandora. She had heard whispers about Facility 7 during her academy days. It was where they kept the weapons that were too dangerous to destroy, but too terrible to use. As her ship changed course toward the classified coordinates, she wondered what horrors humanity was about to unleash. On Europa, Dr. Ru Dongmin was awakened at 3 a.m. by military police. They escorted him to a laboratory he had helped design 30 years ago, but had never expected to see again. The quantum manipulation devices were exactly as he had left them, waiting patiently for the day when humanity might need to bend reality itself to their will. Sir, his assistant asked nervously, are we really going to use these things? The Vorthok wanted to see monsters, Dr. Ru replied, his hands already moving over the familiar controls. Let's show them what we learned in our darkest centuries. Across human space, the machinery of war was awakening. Not the clean, honorable war that the galaxy expected, but something far more terrible. The Vorthok had opened a door that humanity had kept sealed for 200 years. Now they were about to learn why it had been sealed in the first place. The galaxy was about to discover that. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their numbers. It was their choice to show mercy. And that choice could be revoked. Admiral. Vexel S6 eyes darted across the holographic reports flooding his command center. His serpentine body coiled in frustration as he tried to make sense of what was happening to his mighty empire. The Vorthok had conquered 17 star systems in the past century, but nothing had prepared them for this. Commander Zixtel explained to me again how 3,000 laser rifles simply stopped working. He hissed through his translator. The younger Vorthok officer's scales had turned pale with fear. Sir, the weapons looked perfect. They passed all inspections. But when our soldiers tried to fire them during the morning drill, they just crumbled, like they were made of sand. And the ammunition also turned to dust, sir. But here's the strange part. The weapons worked fine the day before. Our engineers ran diagnostics right up until the moment they failed. Aide Vextel slammed his clawed hand on the command console. That's impossible. Metal doesn't just decide to become dust. But the reports kept coming. On Vorthok Prime, an entire battalion had woken up to find their battle armor had been replaced overnight. The replacements looked identical, felt identical, even past scanner tests. But the moment they entered combat training, the suits began falling apart piece by piece. Sir, called out Lieutenant Crixmore from the communications station, we're getting reports from the Outer Rim. Base Commander Yithsek says his food supplies have been ... contaminated. Poisoned? No, sir. The food is perfectly safe to eat. But according to the commander, it tastes like pure terror. Every bite fills the soldiers with overwhelming dread. They can't keep anything down. Deep in the shadows of a Vorthok supply depot on Zarian Prime, Captain Bae Sung-ho moved like a ghost. His infiltration suit bent light around him, making him nearly invisible to both organic eyes and electronic sensors. But invisibility wasn't the most frightening thing about him. The most frightening thing was his patience. He had been watching the Vorthok supply officer for 3 days, learning his routines, his habits, his fears. The alien checked his quarters every night at exactly 2,300 hours. Always looking under his sleeping platform, always checking the air vents. Tonight, Beisunjo would give him something to find. He waited until the supply officer finished his inspection and settled down to sleep. Then, moving silently across the room, he placed a small device next to the alien's bed. It wasn't a bomb or a weapon. It was something much worse, a dream broadcaster by morning. The supply officer would wake up screaming about nightmares so vivid they felt real. Dreams of human soldiers who could walk through walls, who could appear anywhere, who knew every secret thought in his head. Before leaving, Bae Sung-ho took out a small vial of synthetic blood, chemically identical to Vorthok blood. He wrote a simple message on the wall. "We know where you sleep." Similar messages were appearing across the Vorthok Empire. Not threats of death, but something worse. The promise that humans could reach them anywhere, anytime. The only reason they were still alive was because humanity chose to let them live. On the bridge of the stealth ship Silent Thunder, Lieutenant Oh Hae-young monitored the psychological warfare campaign. Her screens showed Vorthok military installations across their empire, and the data was beautiful in its simplicity. "Commander Park, you need to see this," she called out. "The Base 7 on Vorthok Prime has reported a 60% increase in sick leave requests. The soldiers are claiming they're too afraid to sleep." Commander Park Juniseo floated over to her station. In zero gravity, his movements were smooth and practiced. "What about their equipment reliability?" "Down to 30% effectiveness, sir? But here's the interesting part. We haven't actually sabotaged most of it. They're so paranoid about human infiltration that they're finding problems that don't exist." "Explain." "Yesterday, Vorthok engineer spent 6 hours fixing a perfectly good weapon because he was convinced humans had tampered with it. He ended up breaking it himself. Their doubt is doing our work for us. The psychological campaign was working better than anyone had hoped. The Vorthok military was designed around absolute confidence in their technology and their superiority. Now, every piece of equipment was suspect. Every meal might be contaminated. Every shadow might hide a human infiltrator. On the planet Vorthok, 7, Sergeant Kim Woobin crouched in the ventilation system of a military communications hub. He wasn't there to destroy anything. He was there to make them think he might. He placed small, harmless devices throughout the facility, things that would beep occasionally, flash random lights, or make soft clicking sounds. The Vorthok would spend days trying to figure out what they were for, never realizing they were just noisemakers. The real genius was in the timing. The devices would activate just as the Vorthok were trying to send important communications. Not enough to block the signals, but enough to make them doubt whether their messages were getting through. "Base, this is Infiltration Team 7. He whispered into his communicator. "Package delivered. The Vorthok are going to spend the next week taking apart their own equipment looking for bombs that don't exist." Back on the flagship, Admiral Vextel was receiving reports that made his blood run cold. Military efficiency was collapsing across his empire. Soldiers were refusing to eat, refusing to sleep, refusing to trust their own equipment. "Sir," his aide reported nervously, "the Third Fleet is requesting permission to return to base. They claim their weapons are unreliable. Did we test them?" "Yes, sir. All weapons passed inspection, but the crews are convinced the humans have somehow compromised them." "And the food situation? Getting worse, sir?" "Our psychological analysts say the fear taste effect is spreading. Even soldiers who haven't encountered the contaminated supplies are starting to report the same symptoms." Vextel realized with growing horror that the humans weren't just fighting a war, they were fighting his soldiers' minds. Every Vorthok warrior was now afraid of shadows, suspicious of their own equipment, terrified of sleeping in their own beds. The humans had turned his mighty empire into a collection of paranoid, frightened soldiers who jumped at every sound, and they had done it without firing a single shot. Lieutenant Ohayanung smiled as she watched the data streams. Commander, their military efficiency has dropped to 20%. At this rate, they'll be too afraid to fight within the week. Phase 3? Commander Park asked. It's not yet, sir. Let's see how much more damage their own fears can do. Sometimes the best weapon is the enemy's imagination. Emperor Zachthel's massive form trembled as he gripped the armrests of his crystal throne. His reptilian skin, once a proud deep green that commanded respect across the galaxy, had faded to a sickly pale color. The throne room that had witnessed the surrender of 17 species now felt like a tomb. Your Majesty, General Vixmore approached cautiously, his own scales showing the stress patterns of fear. The 3rd and 5th battle fleets have simply vanished. No debris, no distress signals, no evidence of battle. They were there one moment, gone the next. What do you mean vanished? Adakthar's voice cracked, betraying the terror he tried. To hide the sensor logs, show them disappearing in perfect formation, as if they never existed at all. But sir, that's not the worst part. The Emperor's 6 eyes, fixed on his general, continue. Before they disappeared, we received a single transmission. It was from Fleet Admiral Korthvan himself. He said the space around them was ... changing. Reality itself was bending. Said he could see human ships that weren't there, weapons that fired backwards through time, and then ... silence. Zachthel felt his heart skip a beat. The Vorthok had always prided themselves on their understanding of physics and warfare. They had conquered worlds through superior technology and tactical brilliance. But the humans were rewriting the rules of reality itself. What of the 7th Fleet near Rigel? Gone, Your Majesty. But this time, we have witnesses. The merchant. Vessels in the area reported seeing something impossible. Human ships didn't attack the fleet. They just ... absorbed it. The Vorthok vessels were pulled into the human ships like they were made of liquid, and then both fleets vanished. On the bridge of the UES Retribution, Commander Ru Jae-soon studied the tactical display with calm satisfaction. The ship itself was a marvel of human engineering that would have been impossible just months ago. It could phase between dimensions, existing in multiple realities simultaneously. To the Vorthok, it appeared as a ghost ship that could strike from angles that didn't exist. Sir, reported Lieutenant Park Sojin from the Quantum Warfare Station, the dimensional disruptor is fully charged. It can erase their entire home fleet from this reality if you give the order. Not yet, Ru, Jae-soon replied. We want them to understand what they're facing. Begin phase transition protocols. Let them see us coming. The Retribution began to shift between dimensions, appearing as a translucent image in normal space. To the Vorthok defenders, it looked like a ship, made of light and shadows, there but not there, real but impossible. Sir, called out Ensign Kong Hai-jin from communications. We're receiving frantic transmissions from Vorthok Prime. Their orbital defense platforms are powering up. But sir, ... they're targeting empty space. Their targeting systems are confused. By our quantum signature, explained Commander Lee Minwoo, the ship's science officer. They can detect us, but their computers can't figure out where we actually are. To them, we're everywhere and nowhere at once. The orbital platforms opened fire, sending streams of plasma and antimatter into space. The weapons passed harmlessly through the Retribution's phased hull, striking nothing but vacuum. The humans watched with dark amusement as the mighty Vorthok defenses fired at ghosts. Now, Ju Jae-sung ordered quietly. The Retribution fired a single quantum pulse. The weapon didn't explode or burn or destroy in any conventional sense. Instead, it simply convinced the atoms in the orbital platforms that they would rather be somewhere else. The massive defense stations, each the size of a city, gently dissolved into their component particles and drifted away on the solar wind. On. Vorthok Prime Emperor Zachthal watched his impregnable defenses disappear without a sound. No explosions, no fire, no debris. They simply stopped existing. Your Majesty, his communications officer reported with a shaking voice. "We're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." "Put it through," Zakthal commanded, trying to inject some authority into his voice. The main display showed Commander Rouge Song standing calmly on his bridge. The human looked remarkably ordinary, not the monster that Zakthal had expected. But his eyes held something that made the Emperor's blood run cold. Absolute certainty. Emperor Zakthal Ju Jaesung spoke in perfect Vorthok. "You wanted to see what monsters looked like. Are you satisfied with what you found?" I offer the surrender of the Vorthok Empire," Zakthal stammered. "Please, no more. We yield." Yield." Ju Jaesung's voice was soft, almost gentle. "You poison our children, destroy our worlds, and now you want to yield. Tell me, Emperor, what would you have done to humanity if we had surrendered when you first attacked?" Zakthal. Silence. Was answer enough? "We will accept your surrender," Ju Jaesung continued, "when every human colony you attacked has been restored, when every child you poisoned has been healed, every world you corrupted has been cleansed. Till then, we are just getting started." The transmission ended, and immediately the lights in the throne room began to flicker. The Emperor's personal guards looked around nervously as their equipment started to malfunction. "Your Majesty," the communications officer reported, "we're losing contact with our outer provinces. The power grid is failing, but our engineers say there's nothing wrong with it." "How is that possible? The humans aren't destroying our infrastructure." "Sir," they quoting it, "our own systems are turning against us. They've taken over everything: power plants, transportation networks, even basic communication systems." Across the Vorthok Empire, the same scene was playing out. Traffic control systems began routing vehicles in circles. Power grids shut down, randomly, only to restart moments later. Communication networks carried messages to the wrong destinations. The humans weren't breaking the Vorthok civilization, they were playing with it. On the bridge of the Retribution, Commander Ru Jaesung watched the chaos unfold on Vorthok Prime. The planet's lights flickered in patterns that spelled out messages. In ancient human languages, the transportation systems had been reprogrammed to draw enormous human characters visible from orbit. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we're detecting massive power buildups in their remaining military installations. They're preparing for a final attack." "Let them come," Ju Jaesung said calmly. "We've been patient long enough." The Vorthok's final assault fleet rose from their homeworld like an angry swarm. Thousands of ships, representing centuries of military might, advanced on the human position. It was an impressive sight, the last desperate gamble of a dying empire. Ju Jaesung raised his hand, and the Retribution's quantum weapons powered up. This time, he wouldn't be gentle. "For every human child they poisoned," he whispered, "for every world they destroyed, for every family they tore apart." The human fleet opened fire, and the Vorthok Armada simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not scattered, not defeated. They were simply edited out of reality, as if they had never been there at all. On Vorthok Prime, Emperor Zakthal watched his empire's final hope vanish in absolute silence. He finally understood what the humans had been trying to tell him. They could have ended this war in the first hour, but they had chosen to let it continue. They had wanted the Vorthok to understand what it felt like to be helpless, to be prey, to watch everything you cared about disappear. Now he knew, and the knowledge was more terrifying than any weapon. The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a deep rumble that echoed through the vast hall. Ambassador Lim Sujin walked forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor as thousands of alien eyes watched her every move. The chamber, built to accommodate beings from dozens of different worlds, had never felt so silent. Above her, holographic displays showed the final moments of the Vorthok Empire's surrender. Massive warships floating dead in space, their crews, too terrified to fight, entire planets with their defense grid shut down, not by force, but by fear.
Ow.
The most powerful military force in the galaxy had been reduced to a whimpering shadow in just 6 months. "Honored representatives," Lim Sujin began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. "The Vorthok Empire has agreed to full reparations for their war crimes against humanity. Their bioweapons have been neutralized. Their military reduced to defensive capabilities only. The Altarian representative, his crystalline form shimmering with nervous energy, leaned forward. Ambassador Lim, the weapons your species used, the ships that could exist in multiple dimensions, the devices that could erase matter from reality itself, ... How long have humans possessed such technology? Since before we met any of you, she replied simply. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers from a dozen different species. We chose to limit ourselves because we believed in the possibility of a peaceful galaxy. The Vorthok taught us that some species only understand strength. In the back of the chamber, the Centauri delegate turned to his aide, his voice barely a whisper. Did you know about this? Did anyone know? Sir, our intelligence services had no idea. We thought the humans were ... primitive, weak. They've been playing with children's toys while hiding weapons that could reshape reality itself. Admiral Park Ji-ho, now wearing the insignia of Supreme Commander of Human Forces, stepped forward. His uniform was simple compared to the elaborate dress of other military leaders in the chamber, but somehow it commanded more respect than all the gold braid and ceremonial weapons combined. The Terran Accords are hereby dissolved, he announced. For 2 centuries, we limited ourselves, hoping to prove that civilized beings could coexist peacefully. In their place, we established the Soul Doctrine. Humanity will respond to aggression with overwhelming force, but we will always prefer peace. We suggest you remember which option you choose to give us. The chamber was so quiet that the hum of the air recycling systems seemed deafening. Every representative understood the message. The humans they had dismissed as junior partners in galactic civilization had been holding back all along. They possessed the power to conquer the galaxy, but they chose to use it only when pushed beyond all reasonable limits. The Andromedian ambassador, his tentacles writhing with anxiety, spoke up. Commander Park, what assurances do we have that humanity won't use these weapons against other species? The same assurance you've always had, Park Ji-ho replied. Our choice to show restraint. The difference is that now you know what we're restraining. As the session ended, representatives from dozens of worlds gathered in small groups, their conversations filled with nervous energy. The Regellians, who had been planning their own expansion into human space, quietly canceled their military exercises. The Tau Sekians, who had been refusing to honor trade agreements, suddenly found themselves eager to renegotiate more favorable terms for humanity. Remind me to send a gift to the human embassy, the Centauri delegate whispered to his aide. To something expensive. Something that says, please don't ever give us a reason to see your true capabilities. 6 months later, the galaxy was experiencing its most peaceful period in recorded history. Trade routes that had been plagued by pirates for decades were suddenly safe. Border disputes that had raged for centuries were being resolved through negotiation. The threat of war had become unthinkable, not because of treaties, but because everyone now understood what war with humanity would cost. On the reconstructed world of New Busan, Captain Lee Dongwoo walked through the memorial gardens where the first Vorthok bioweapons had been deployed. The poisoned soil had been cleansed by human technology. The twisted plants replaced with flowers that bloomed in colors that had never existed in nature. Children played among the memorial stones, their laughter echoing off the crystalline monuments. Uncle, a young voice called out. Lee Dongwoo turned to see his nephew, Kim Jaemin, running toward him with a group of friends. What made him smile was that the group included not just human children, but young Altarians, Centaurians, and even a few Vorthok youngsters, whose families had been relocated to help with the restoration efforts. Look what we've built. Jaemin held up a small spacecraft made from scrap metal and recycled components. It's a peace ship. It can fly between worlds and help people be friends. Lee Dongwoo knelt down to examine the toy, his heart swelling with pride. It's beautiful. What does it do when it encounters bad guys? It doesn't fight them, explained one of the Vorthok children, her young voice earnest. It just shows them what happens to worlds that choose war instead of peace. The wisdom of children, Lee Dongwoo thought. They understood what the adults had taken centuries to learn. In the distance, human observation stations maintained their quiet vigil over the restoration efforts. The Vorthok workers labored tirelessly to repair the damage their empire had caused, watched over by human supervisors who ensured they never forgot the lesson they had learned. It wasn't punishment, it was education. The galaxy had learned that the monsters in the darkness weren't waiting to attack. They were waiting to respond. And that knowledge changed everything. As the sun set over New Busan, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Li Dongwu reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy was at peace, not because humanity was weak, but because they had proven they were strong enough to choose mercy. The children continued to play, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Human and alien, former enemies and new friends, all united by the simple understanding that peace was better than war. And somewhere in the shadows, human guardians watched over them all, ready to remind anyone who forgot that lesson exactly what the alternative would cost. The peace would last. Not because it was enforced by treaties or maintained by weakness, but because every species in the galaxy now understood a simple truth. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their military might. It was their choice to use restraint, and that choice, once demonstrated, could never be taken for granted again. The galaxy was safer, because its most dangerous species had chosen to be its most peaceful. And everyone knew that as long as that choice remained, the stars would shine on a universe where children could play without fear, where different species could work together, and where the darkness held only the promise of protection, rather than the threat of destruction. The war was over. The peace had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. The end.